The air in my in-laws' mansion was thick with the scent of expensive holiday candles and their barely disguised contempt for me. It was Christmas Day, and Julian, my husband, and I had just presented his parents, Helena and Arthur, with gifts we had carefully selected. Now it was my turn to receive. Helena, the queen of passive aggression, slid a small, sloppily wrapped box across the marble coffee table toward me. Her eyes held mine, glittering with an unmistakable, icy malice. "We thought this was fitting, Anya," she drawled, drawing out my name as if tasting something unpleasant. "Something simple, like your tastes." My chest tightened, but I maintained a polite composure. I peeled back the paper to reveal a generic, mass-produced ceramic figurine. A cheap, dollar store trinket that was a blatant insult to my dignity. Julian shifted uncomfortably, but before I could respond, I noticed a piece of plastic taped awkwardly to the figurine's base. I quickly excused myself, claiming I needed to retrieve something from my purse upstairs. Once alone in the quiet hallway, I carefully peeled the plastic item from the bottom of the ceramic trinket. It was a flimsy, slightly warped magnetic keycard, the kind used for secured access. Stuck to the card, almost peeling off, was a rough label maker strip bearing a strange combination, SL 417, Unit 14B. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was an object of purpose, not a forgotten piece of packaging. It looked distinctly like a key card for a storage facility and a corresponding unit number. Why would this critical access item be taped to a deliberately cheap Christmas insult? Had they made a careless mistake? I quickly tucked the card into the inner pocket of my winter coat, returning to the living room with a forced smile. Helena and Arthur were now loudly discussing Julian's upcoming trip, but I caught them both exchanging nervous, fleeting glances toward the area where the cheap gift had been opened. That night, unable to sleep next to a deeply slumbering Julian, I hunched over my laptop, typing the cryptic code SL 417 into search engines. The combination wasn't associated with any large, national storage chain. Finally, after an hour of focused searching, I found a match. Secure Lock Storage, Facility 417, located in a grim, rundown industrial area miles from their affluent neighborhood. The secrecy of the location immediately raised red flags. Arthur and Helena lived a life of highly publicized, curated luxury. They would never use a facility like this unless they were hiding something critical. The insult was a distraction, but the key card was a gift of truth. I knew I couldn't involve Julian. His ingrained loyalty to his parents would either paralyze him or force him to tell them. The next afternoon, while they were all occupied, I resolved to drive out and investigate the unit alone. The following day, after carefully tracking Julian's itinerary, I drove the 20 minutes to the industrial park. Secure Lock Facility 417 was exactly as the online images suggested. Cheap, fenced, and utterly desolate. My palms were sweaty as I approached the main gate. I swiped the key card I had found. Beep. The metal gate rolled back, granting me access. I drove carefully to the rear building, locating the door marked Unit 14B access. I used the card again, and the building door unlocked. I found Unit 14B itself. It was a large, premium-sized unit, strangely pristine in this dilapidated setting. I entered the unit number 14B into the keypad, and the heavy-duty lock clicked open. I stepped inside, expecting old furniture or forgotten antiques. Instead, I was met by stacks of highly organized, professional-grade filing boxes, labeled with alarming precision: Q4 taxes, audit, and mortgage restructuring. My hands were trembling as I pulled the nearest box off the stack, reading the label, 2023 Outstanding Debt, Arthur. I opened the lid. The contents were not old, disorganized files. They were current, deeply sensitive financial documents. I saw detailed records of massive, high-interest loans, severely maxed-out credit card statements, and documentation outlining multiple, spectacular investment failures. The volume of the debt was astounding. Arthur, who had spent a decade bragging about his financial genius, was leveraged to the point of imminent ruin. Their carefully maintained wealth was a complete, fragile illusion, and they were risking everything, including Julian's future, to maintain the facade. The cheap figurine was a perfect smokescreen. I quickly took high-resolution photographic evidence of the most recent, most damning documents, focusing on loan default notices and fast-approaching deadlines before securing the unit and driving away, my mind reeling. Back in the safety of my apartment, I meticulously reviewed the photographic evidence. The documents revealed a situation far worse than mere financial struggle. Arthur and Helena were facing complete financial devastation. One contract, clearly a document they intended to bury forever, referenced a massive, multi-million-dollar loan that was secured, not by Arthur's business assets, but by the collateral of their very identity, their lavish family home. The foreclosure process was already underway, with the final default deadline just 3 weeks away. The source of their intense anxiety at Christmas was suddenly clear. I also spotted alarming files concerning a trust fund, Julian's trust fund, which Arthur had always claimed was sealed until Julian's 40th birthday. My fear escalated. I realized Arthur was likely planning to seize Julian's money to save their collapsing mansion. My immediate focus shifted to the bank listed on the defaulted home loan, a notoriously ruthless regional institution. Their aggressive foreclosure tactics explained Arthur's absolute panic. As I continued to analyze the photos of the storage unit files, I noticed a disturbing pattern. The paperwork indicated that a recent large payment had been made to the home loan, just enough to stave off the final deadline by a month. I knew they didn't have that kind of cash. I then found the box detailing Julian's trust. The documents revealed that Arthur had successfully taken out a massive, highly irregular bridge loan against Julian's trust fund to make that last-minute payment. Arthur had already illegally leveraged his son's future inheritance to bail out their home. My course of action became clear. I had to stop Julian from unknowingly making any further investments into his father's sinking ship. To gain more leverage without Julian's knowledge, I decided to focus on the storage unit lease itself. Using the unique serial number from the key card, I managed to access the facility's online database anonymously. I discovered that the account was leased and paid for entirely under Helena's name, making her the official executor of the clandestine financial operation. Helena wasn't just Arthur's smug accomplice. She was the architect of their downfall. I also noticed the account had been paid for an entire year in advance using a single, significant lump sum payment. If they were facing bankruptcy and foreclosure, where did that large amount of liquid cash suddenly come from? I realized they must have recently liquidated a major asset to afford the extreme secrecy of the unit, deepening the mystery of their financial desperation and deception. I needed the original trust documents from the storage unit to build Julian's case, but I couldn't risk returning myself. I needed Julian to go, but without knowing he was looking for debt records. I devised a perfect cover story. I called Helena, feigning panic, and told her I had accidentally left my expensive diamond heirloom necklace, a previous, significant gift from Julian, hidden in the frantic, hasty wrapping of the ceramic figurine box. I knew their desperation to cover up the insulting gift would make them act immediately. Within the hour, Julian called me, sounding stressed and annoyed. Mom says there's a box of seasonal items in a cheap rental unit downtown. She needs you to check inside the boxes for your necklace. It's too far for her to go. My calculated ruse had worked flawlessly. Julian was now driving directly to the storage unit, unaware he was walking into a financial graveyard. I stayed on the phone with Julian as he drove to the remote facility. I guided him with careful, calm instructions, pretending I was trying to recall the exact box my necklace might be in. He used the key card and entered the combination. "It's freezing, Anya, and it's only file boxes. Nothing seasonal," he whispered, his confusion evident. I directed him to the precise location of the box containing the full trust documentation. He pulled the wrong box, the one labeled Q4 taxes, and muttered, "Why would she keep tax records here?" As he pulled it down, the old cardboard bottom ripped apart. A single, crumpled letter fluttered to the floor. Julian picked it up, reading the official letterhead. His voice, once annoyed, dropped to a stunned, absolute silence. He then read the letter's contents aloud. It was the final threat from the bank, detailing the imminent foreclosure on his family home. Julian's voice was strained, raw with a mix of shock and betrayal as he quickly searched the rest of the boxes. He found the evidence of the defaulted home loan and, Finally, the box detailing his trust fund. The realization was devastating. Major reveal. The full trust documents confirmed that Arthur had indeed taken a huge, fraudulent bridge loan against Julian's future inheritance, using the money to keep the home loan current and save his parents' social status. He hadn't just used his own money. He had stolen his son's future. The truth was an emotional wrecking ball. Julian hung up the phone abruptly, unable to continue the conversation. He was finally awake, seeing his parents not as benefactors, but as selfish, desperate villains willing to sacrifice him to maintain their fragile public image. An hour later, Julian arrived back at our apartment, completely shattered. The foreclosure letter and the trust documents were clutched so tightly they were wrinkled. He admitted that his parents had been pressuring him intensely to invest a substantial portion of his current savings into one of Arthur's highly speculative schemes. He hadn't yet committed, but the persistence had been relentless. A closer look at the old tax records he had inadvertently retrieved from the storage unit revealed that Arthur's sure thing scheme was the exact same failed investment vehicle that had caused his initial financial spiral 5 years ago. They weren't seeking investment. They were desperately seeking a reckless, high-risk bailout from their son, proving they were willing to destroy him financially to avoid their own humiliation. We decided to confront Arthur and Helena, armed with the undeniable truth. We met them at their home, a location we now knew was mere weeks from being lost. The tension was suffocating. Julian, usually diplomatic, was firm and unforgiving as he placed the foreclosure letter on their polished table. Arthur feigned ignorance, claiming it was a temporary glitch. Helena, however, saw the trust papers in Julian's hand. Her composure cracked instantly, and she turned her chilling rage directly toward me. She launched into a quiet, venomous attack. "You were never worthy of this family, Anya. You brought nothing but your cheap, provincial background into our lives. I knew you would ruin everything." Her words confirmed every single veiled insult I had endured for years. Helena's outburst, intended to deflect, served only to ignite Julian's final, protective fury. He stood up, towering over his mother, the look in his eyes one of utter disillusionment. "The gift, Mom? That cheap, nasty figurine you used to insult her? Was that really necessary?" His voice was cold, measured, and devastating. Helena, cornered and panicking, finally broke. It was necessary to remind her of her place, and I made sure it was worthless, unlike the truly important things. Julian's voice, now utterly devoid of warmth, delivered the final blow. "Then why did that worthless box contain the key card to your entire financial ruin, Mom? Was that worthless, too?" Helena gasped, her mask shattering completely. Arthur went pale, staring at the floor. Julian's loyalty had irrevocably shifted. Arthur, attempting a desperate counterattack, tried to focus the blame on my actions. "You stole private documents, Anya. You broke into a unit," he sputtered, shaking with rage. I remained calm, holding up the key card I'd retrieved months ago. "You handed me the key card, Arthur, taped to a ceramic trinket you called fitting. I simply used the key you gave me. I produced the photo of the storage unit lease, and I noticed the unit was paid for a year in advance with a huge lump sum. If you're truly bankrupt, as this letter claims, what high-value asset did you liquidate to bury these documents?" Arthur and Helena exchanged a fleeting look of shared, sickening terror. Julian caught the exchange, confirming my suspicion that they had sold a prized possession to buy silence and time. Julian, now fueled by absolute certainty, pressed them relentlessly on the trust fund loan and the mysterious lump sum. He demanded to know exactly what they sold to afford the year-long lease on the secret unit. Arthur finally broke, confessing that he had been forced to sell his prized vintage car collection to raise the cash. Helena, however, remained strategically silent. Major revelation, Julian suddenly recalled an obscure conversation from years earlier. He realized the true reason they sold the car collection. They needed immediate, massive cash flow to pay a settlement in an undisclosed, hushed-up legal scandal that had occurred 5 years ago. The debt wasn't entirely a failed investment. It was the cost of a long-term, expensive cover-up, which they were now trying to pass on to Julian. Julian, completely hardened by the cascade of revelations, retained a specialist financial litigation lawyer the very next day. He instructed the lawyer to formally investigate the legality of the fraudulent bridge loan Arthur had taken out against his trust. We provided the lawyer with the photographic evidence of the massive debt, the foreclosure notice, and the details of the highly secret storage unit. The lawyer quickly uncovered a deep connection. The regional bank holding the defaulted home loan was closely linked to the same investors who were involved in the 5-year-old legal scandal. This suggested a much larger, darker web of interconnected financial deceit and debts, all carefully orchestrated by Arthur and Helena to keep their public image untarnished. Arthur and Helena, realizing Julian was proceeding with a devastating legal inquiry, abandoned all pretense of dignity and switched to the emotional warfare they mastered. They began calling Julian relentlessly, begging him not to destroy his family legacy. Helena left a vicious, dramatic voicemail for Julian, claiming I was a manipulative schemer who was forcing him to steal from his own mother. Julian played the message for me, his expression resolute. In the background of Helena's tearful plea, I recognized Arthur's voice, distinctly coaching her on what words to use and when to weep. Their emotional display was completely fabricated, a final, cynical attempt to manipulate their son, which only reinforced Julian's decision to seek legal justice. Julian's lawyer filed the preliminary injunction against Arthur, a legal maneuver that immediately froze the remainder of Julian's trust and initiated a formal inquiry into the legality of the home loan. The move was publicly devastating. I then launched my final anonymous strike. I tipped off the local investigative journalist about the sudden foreclosure of the prominent Arthur and Helena's prestigious address, linking it to a decades-old corporate scandal. The journalist immediately recognized the high-value story, the spectacular collapse of the wealthy elite due to years of hypocrisy and hidden debt. The shame of public exposure, published under the scrutiny of the local press, was the ultimate, necessary weapon against their desperate love for social status. Julian, feeling completely vindicated but seeking total closure, returned to the storage unit one final time. We used the key card together. He searched meticulously, wanting to know every last secret. Behind a false, flimsy wall panel in the unit, he found a final, small box. It contained nothing of financial value, but something far more potent, the original, official legal settlement from the 5-year-old scandal, the wrongful termination lawsuit that Arthur had lost due to his illegal and discriminatory practices. The settlement was for the exact, massive amount as the bridge loan Arthur had secretly taken out against Julian's trust. The debt wasn't from a business failure. It was the direct cost of Arthur's systemic cruelty and bigotry, which they were trying to pass on to Julian as his own financial burden. The financial journalist's expose dropped the next day, detailing the connection between the current foreclosure and the older corporate scandal. The social and professional fallout was immediate and irreparable. Arthur was summarily fired from his consulting position, and Helena was instantly ostracized by her social circle. She called me, not Julian, her voice a terrifying mix of rage and despair. "You should have stayed in your cheap place, Anya. I gave you that figurine to show you your place, and now you've stolen every single thing that mattered to us." I replied calmly, "You didn't give me a cheap gift, Helena. You gave me the key to the truth, and I was worthy of using it." A week later, Julian and I celebrated the official court order that successfully overturned the fraudulent bridge loan against his trust. The victory was total. Julian looked at me, his eyes full of gratitude, respect, and a love that was finally free from his family's toxic control. "You didn't need to be good enough for them, Anya," he said, holding my hand tightly. "You were smart enough to save my entire future. You are the only true worth I have." I realized the true triumph wasn't the legal victory. It was the profound catharsis of having the man I loved finally see me for the strong, capable woman I was, completely validating my true value. The ceramic figurine, the initial instrument of their insult, became a bizarre symbol of our beginning. Julian and I framed the cheap trinket and placed it on a high shelf in our new home, right next to a framed copy of the final court order overturning the trust loan. Julian, free from his parents' financial and emotional manipulation, used the recovered trust money to start his own successful, ethical business, a venture focused on sustainability that Arthur had repeatedly mocked as frivolous. Julian's genuine, ethical success was the ultimate, silent insult to his father's mercenary life. Julian's lawyer sent us the final notification. The in-laws' magnificent mansion was officially sold at auction. Arthur and Helena were forced to move into a tiny, anonymous apartment. They had lost everything they truly valued, not just the wealth, but the social distinction that fueled their cruelty. I felt a fleeting moment of pity, understanding that their cheap gift stemmed from a lifetime of profound, agonizing insecurity they could no longer afford to mask. Closure. My revenge was complete, achieved not through an act of deliberate financial cruelty, but through the patient, strategic use of the truth they tried so desperately to conceal. I had proved that the most worthless item can indeed contain the most valuable secret. The next Christmas, Julian and I weren't at a mansion. We were on a quiet, remote tropical island, celebrating our shared freedom and new life. I received an email notification that the Secure Lock Storage Unit 417 lease had finally expired, and the unit's remaining contents were scheduled to be auctioned off to pay the past due balance. I deleted the email instantly. I didn't need the records anymore. The truth had already executed its final judgment. I looked at Julian, genuinely happy, whole, and completely unburdened by his toxic legacy. The cheap figurine was back at home, but the key card to the storage unit was gone forever. Final line. They gave me a cheap gift to show me my low place, but all they did was hand me the key to their deepest secret and the power to unlock my own invaluable future.